Hey everybody, welcome. I'm sure we'll have more people coming in as I get started, so you know, just be aware of that. I like it when the room's set up like this because I want to say like bride or groom, because it's like, it was broken when it got here. My talk on security in the software procurement process. Don't be fooled, it should hopefully be interesting, even though the word procurement is in there. It could be it was broken when I got here as well, right? Depending on whether you inherited some of these problems when you came to a firm, perhaps. But let's jump in. So we're going to do about 45 minutes, including questions, so that you guys have time to get to the next talk. So I'm going to get through, you know, all of this in some level. So I'll do a little bit of introduction, just talk about me and what I do and what this session's about. I'm then going to talk about the idea of your software versus not your software. Because that really sets up perhaps some of your obligations that you might have if you work at a company when you're looking at software, or if you are providing services to a company around software security. I'll kind of set the scene around how I kind of think that this is less of a problem with big software these days, and I'll talk about what I mean by big software, so to speak, and where I want to focus this on kind of the products that you buy and you put into your network that are maybe from smaller outfits or just, you know, less well-known places, perhaps. I'm going to use some case studies that come from our research arm, just around finding O-Day in commercial products, right? And these are not like complicated bugs. These are simple bugs that you know really you would hope were not going to be there when you bought this product. I'll talk a little bit about what it takes to fix this stuff, because anyone who's ever worked in, you know, responsible disclosure, working with vendors to tell them about bugs and how to fix it, will have horror stories just like we do around how that can be either very, very easy or really not possible in some cases. And then I'll round out by kind of suggesting that there are some proactive things that you can do when you work at an organization or when you're advising an organization on how they should really be thinking about software security when they're buying the products that they buy. So let's do that. Just a little bit about us, or about me. I've been a consultant for a long time. It's probably creeping up on the 20-year mark now. I refuse to change this slide until it hits 20, so we'll call it 15 right now. I've done a lot of pen testing, right? In my early years, did a lot of attacker modeled stuff, what we call red teaming now, all of that good stuff. And then obviously you tend to, as you move further in your career, I've always kept that side up, but I've also been moving into the side of, you know, advising companies on how to actually secure this stuff, either through incident response or through security program development or whatever it might be. Essentially I work for a company called NCC Group, which was why I love presenting at the Norris Conference Center, because everyone thinks that we sponsored the wireless. So yes, doing our bit for LASCON. We've been around quite a long time. We were formed back in '99. We're a security consultancy and research group. We're about 2,000 people around the world. So from a services side, you know, if you guys were just all in with Chris on the keynote, all of those words that are really confusing around the taxonomy, right? Those are our services, right? You know, pen testing, risk management, application security review, whatever it is, vulnerability assessment. We do all of that stuff for our clients. In the US, well, we're based all over, and I'm based out of the Austin office, which is why I love coming to LASCON, because it's just up the road. If you've never heard of NCC Group, that's kind of our problem, for sure. You may have heard of the brands that or the companies that we acquired and brought into NCC Group. Intrepidus Group, ISEC Partners, Matasano, and NGS Software. If you've not heard of any of those, then the problem is way worse than I thought it was, but we will keep grinding away. So, today's session, what do I want to focus on? Well, obviously, the software you use in your company is really varied, right? It ultimately ranges from things like operating systems and platforms like web servers or Apache Struts or Oracle or whatever it might be. You know, the whole thing around like what kind of software do you use also includes SaaS now and all of, you know, mobile and all that good stuff. And this can also come right down to really specialist desktop tools, right? Maybe you've got a geosciences division and like they need some like really cool app to do their thing. So that's software as well, obviously. But it also includes the software you produce yourself, right? If you're the kind of company that makes your own software, and that may be just for internal use, or it might be because you sell a product. These days, when we're talking about software, while we still are sometimes talking about things like HP non-stop tandems and Xeos mainframes and stuff. Mainly, we're talking about web-based technologies, right? We're talking about web apps or web services of some description, some kind of API, and then some sort of client interacts with that. So either a web app in the true sense, or like a mobile app, or even a fit client that's designed to work with services. But usually, it's going to be web and mobile. But there's still, going to be some stuff in your organization that's buried deep and is more specialist, or it's older, and it's really looking at kind of client-server stuff and different protocols, perhaps. So when you start to look at your organization in terms of the software you have, it's going to be the same for everybody, right? There's a bit of everything, old to new, technologies that are old to new, all of that kind of stuff. Not going to teach you guys about the fact that it can contain vulnerabilities. Hopefully everyone gets that. We're all here at a security conference. Software contains vulnerabilities. So all of the software you have at any point could have a vuln, of course. Things are not necessarily straightforward, though. So if you've got software that doesn't come from kind of like big vendors that have their act together when it comes to software security and SDLC and releasing patches and stuff like that, you might have a really hard time, firstly, knowing that there's flaws in software that you've bought and put on your network, and then actually getting it fixed in the first place. So we're going to look at that smaller product end a little bit, and I'm going to kind of tell you why, because ultimately all of this comes from pen testing, right? All the stuff we do when we try to break into companies. I'm not cracking out an ODA and IIS, right? That's not happening. If I was doing that, it would be a different business model. But ultimately, the bugs that we find are probably going to be with the things that you've bought from like smaller vendors that form a really important part of your ecosystem. But before I get carried away with that, what about this idea of your software versus not your software? Because this can be a little bit ambiguous if you're a company that makes software. So let's kind of jump into it. So I like to think of this in two sort of key ways. This idea of whether you're a producer of IT technology or a user or consumer of it. Now, obviously, some companies can be both, right? Some of you sitting here will have a software development division that makes a product for your customers, or a software development division that makes a product for your internal use. And some of you won't have that at all. But both groups will still be buying software, typically, from other people. So you can kind of like break it down in terms of like characteristics of that. So producers of IT technology, you make a commercial product, software, hardware, embedded, whatever it is, you have an in-house development team for that, and you have a customer base that you have to support for that product. Straightforward. If you're just a consumer or user of IT products or software, you don't make a product that you sell, you just buy commercial products for use. You have the burden of deployment and configuration in conjunction with the support you get for those products. And your customer base is not directly relevant to that software. Like your customer base or how you make money is somewhere else. It's not about software. So as I said, a number of companies will absolutely be both. Just out of interest, like who's both here? Who makes a software product? Cool, that's exactly what I thought, right? And then other people don't make a software product. Instead, they just consume products to do what they do. The point, though, is it's like what level of control or influence do you have over software security in both of these camps? Because they're slightly different, of course. So if you're a producer of software, those folks that just raise your hands, like obviously you have a lot of control over the software you make. Political problems within your company aside, like you do ultimately own the control. So you can have an SDLC, you have a control over release and response cycles, you have control over the product features, and you have control over the support and the deprecation of your code and what you do there. If your use of software is not like that, and because you're a consumer of technology instead, then you don't have any direct influence over security, right? You don't make the product. So what you really are limited to is having control over how you configure and deploy the product. That's kind of where your most influence is. So is this accurate? I think at the most basic level it is. If you just buy a product, you have far less control than if you make it, of course. But I want to kind of focus on, even when you're in this category, or for the people that are in both categories, when we're thinking about the products you buy, you actually have a lot of indirect influence. And sometimes you can really exert that depending on your spending power or how you negotiate. at the end of the day, you always have choices. And what I want to get across with this is for anybody who's not considering security when they're buying products, let's level set again though, right? So when I say big software, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about like the big boys and girls, right? So I'm talking about the stuff you get from Microsoft, Apple, Cisco, Google, you know, companies that have been making products for us for like 3 decades or whatever it's been, right? Now, at this point, most of the big software companies have a handle on software security, right? They have an SDLC, they have bug bounties, they have policies, they have like robust privacy policies on how they protect us, all this kind of stuff. It's very mature. And then as IT practitioners, when we consume this software into our organizations, we have a pretty good support model there, right? We know about patches, we know how to do patches, and we know that the big companies that make software are going to give us patches. And they're probably going to be pretty timely, and they're going to work more often than not. And like we're at a point now where it's not the Wild West of patching. So I think that we can kind of relax to some degree around the big software issues. They still have vulnerabilities, of course. We see that all the time. But how they handle it and how they support us in that is typically pretty good. I think that the efficacy of patch management and what you get from big vendors now is pretty good in terms of like if a vulnerability is disclosed, a timely patch will be created for you. And then we see things like with Microsoft, with the whole shadow brokers, you know, like stuff that happens where like these big O days get disclosed. Microsoft had a patch, and they released the patch before that dump happened. Don't know how they did that, but they did that. That's big software at work, right? So we can have a little bit of confidence in that risk management situation. I think that you know there's people looking out for us if we buy big software. Wouldn't it be great if that's all we had in our organization? Right, and that isn't the case, of course. Now, maybe at some companies, maybe you've like very much standardized, and all you have are products from these really big, well-established software houses. But a lot of companies are not going to be like that. So let's consider all the software you have in your enterprise. I'm going to cross out the problems and then focus on the bit that I want to talk about in this test, because it's the bit that I see being missed more often than not, because it doesn't have a good answer. So software we make ourselves, I'm not going to talk about that. This is not a talk about SDLC. If you make software and you don't do security, shame on you. You control this, so you can handle the security for your own software. If you can't, there are plenty of people that will help you. Software that comes from big vendors. Well, as I've just said, let's cross that one out. I don't want to think about that one just yet, because I think you can reasonably expect that vendor to fix security issues for you in a way that doesn't screw up your life. Sort of, right? What I'm interested in is software that you have in your company that comes from everywhere else. This is often the blind spot, and it's often underappreciated. And you might be thinking, well, what are you talking about? I'll show you. Not all software is created equal, right? We know this. Like the amount of development effort and security development that's gone into a product is largely dependent on how much money that company's invested in it. Not all software vendors are going to have a robust security program. And it's not just about them being a small place, right? They just maybe aren't there for whatever reasons. They haven't gone through the holy war that Microsoft's gone through and all this kind of stuff to get to where they are at the moment. But we put third-party software of all different shapes and sizes into our organization all the time, right? I mean, it just has to exist. If I need that app for that geosciences division or whatever it might be, I'm not going to get it from Microsoft or from Google or from Cisco, right? I'm going to get it from a specialist software place that makes that. How much effort have they put into their security? Well, it's going to be variable, right? If we consider where third-party software could exist, right? It could actually be in one of the most critical locations in your company. It could be in your DMZ, internet-facing, because it's like a file transfer appliance. That's one of the examples I'm going to show you in a minute. It could really be front and center, providing a really critical function that from a security standpoint could be an area of exposure. It's absolutely going to be inside your internal network, right? We buy lots of products to do lots of things. We often join them to the domain and make use of like Active Directory for authentication and all this kind of stuff. So it's going to be in there. Or it might be right down on the user desktop side. Like it might be this specialist thing. Even like, you know, some time card software or whatever you have that your employees have to use. So who scrutinized all that software for vulnerabilities, right? That's kind of the point here. It's going to vary massively. Did the vendor do some due diligence? Is it an open source thing, so that there's an open source community like working on this? Is there a third or fourth party in the mix that's done some kind of review of it and produced some kind of attestation or something that you can look at? This is a whole murky area of software in the enterprise. And that's like, why there are holes there that we can potentially exploit. So let's talk about that just for a little bit. Where do I get this knowledge from? Well, I get it from pen testing, right? I get it from looking at companies and trying to figure out what's wrong with them. So when we do red team projects, as Chris was making fun of earlier, that's what we call pen testing now, right? It has to have a color, all that kind of stuff. We do these open scope ideas, go after the whole company, everything's in scope. So we'll have dedicated goals, and one of those goals usually will be, one of the first goals will be, how do we get in from the outside, right? How do we do that? Act like an attacker in terms of TTP. Number of ways that we're going to achieve this, right? Most people that do this work have similar versions of this flow, right? We'll do we'll do OS in research. We'll do some form of social engineering, maybe spear phishing. We may have physical breach just to get into the network, or we will have external breach via either infrastructure vulnerabilities, like things that are just missing a patch or you've not configured properly, there's still a default password on it, something like that. Or we'll have application level flaws where we're actually finding bugs, sometimes that are not previously known, in order to achieve this goal. Most of the time, these tests are a combination of all of that, right? So from an external side, though, infrastructure and app, those kind of bleed together, because infrastructure is running software as well, right? Like that, when we consider like this external breach from a systems or apps perspective, we're trying to go for this kind of thing, right? In a traditional sort of DMZ type environment. And if there's a cloud, it doesn't really matter. There'll be some integration there as well. But ultimately, there's some concept, usually at 99% of companies, of an external perimeter, even if it's like this, because it's cloud-based as well. And we're trying to find some software that's externally facing, that has a flaw, that when we find a bug and exploit it, we get some kind of pivotable condition on the inside, right? Pen testing 101 from the outside to the inside. So when we're trying to do that, obviously we're looking at like, what are you presenting to the world as a company, right? The IP ranges that you own, or whatever your sort of external footprint is, what is actually there? And when we're looking at trying to find apps that might be vulnerable, that might have these conditions that allow a pivot, we're looking at a few interesting things, right? We're looking at homebrew apps, we're looking at stuff you've written yourself. We're looking at lesser known COTS software, like commercial off-the-shelf software, right, COTS. Lesser known products that maybe have not had the kind of scrutiny that the big products have had. If I'm looking at your external range and you have like Citrix, Cisco VPN Terminator, really unknown file transfer system, Citrix VPN Terminator, it's going to stand out to me that the hot target may be this really unknown file transfer system that you bought from somebody. Open source products as well, of course, variable success rate on that depending on how much scrutiny they've already had. But also it's open source, so I can get the source and I can review the source, right? So that like springboards you on the vulnerability discovery concept. I'm also interested in products that are commercial products that I can get a trial for, right? That I can download, put into the lab, do research on as part of this idea of finding a bug that I need for the pen test. Anything that's well documented as well, like if you're Googling for like name of product admin guide and name of product setup guide and all that, and you're getting like tons and tons of PDFs that tell you all the inner workings of the product and how it gets fantastic, right? I need that. I need that for free. I need the trial for free as well. So we install the software and then we research it for vulns. We do this as part of our pen test. So I'm going to show some examples just to, show you that I'm not lying. The vulnerabilities I'm going to show you, they were O days, obviously. They've now been fixed. We are very into responsible disclosure at the Norris conference at NCC Group, and so everything I'm going to show you is ultimately fixed. But I'm going to show you them just to kind of show you that they were bugs that nobody knew about, that we found during a pen test, that then had some actual impact on what we were able to do against that company. Okay, so free bugs, right? I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but free bugs. The first is our vulnerabilities in a product called Excellion File Transfer Appliance. Okay, as I mentioned before, file transfer appliances sitting in the DMZ that are there for you to exchange big files with your customers or your partners. File transfer is an absolute pain, right? You can't email anything over like what's it like at your firm? 10 meg, 15 meg, whatever it might be. So how are you going to do it? And companies have done various things, right? Some of the bigger companies, Citrix File Share or ShareFile, something like that. SharePoint offers like ways to do this. But there's also a lot of smaller software products that have sprung up to try to help with this secure file exchange concept. How do I get these big files in and out of the firm? So these products pop up a lot on pen tests, right? When we profile what you've got, it's like, what is this thing? Never seen it before. I'm also going to talk about a product called CA eHealth, which is a web application that is made by Computer Associates. And I'm going to talk about a product that probably all of you know called Nexpose that come from Rapid7. If you want to ask them about that product, they're just outside this door. You can go and talk to them after this talk. So let's have a quick look at the bugs. So the first one, this file transfer appliance, right? Credit where credit's due. This was found by a member of my team in Austin, a guy called Daniel Crowley, senior consultant for us. Ultimately, what it was is there's this file transfer appliance that is hosted in the DMZ because of what it does, and it was vulnerable to, or a version of this was vulnerable to unauthenticated SQL injection. Okay, and on some versions of the product, it was possible to turn that into remote code execution. Is that you doing a question or no? Okay, oh, sorry, I thought you were. On this one, though, it was just SQLI, right? OWASP top 10, right? You know, they had this product that had unauthenticated SQLI, and we were able to use it to ultimately read all of the client files off this file transfer system. And the company we were working for were using it to transfer very sensitive files, right? Very sensitive files, stuff that's really critical to their business process. So here they had this piece of COTS software that they'd bought to solve a problem for them that was vulnerable to Pentest 101, day one type vulnerability. And that's really unfortunate, right? And it allowed us to go from having zero knowledge to having some very important knowledge that the company was not happy about. So one simple example of a commercial product that had a simple flaw in it. Completely fixed now. This obviously went through all the process with them, completely done. CA eHealth, okay, so this is a web application from Computer Associates, and this was discovered by a guy called Ben Lincoln, who's a consultant for us up in Seattle, in our Seattle office. And this was a web application that when we looked at it, obviously we didn't have source for it, we just looked at it from a black box web app testing perspective. All of us OWASP people love that. It had something called pre-authenticated command injection. That's pretty much some of the worst series of words that you can string together into a sentence, right? Pre-authenticated command injection. It was in the password hashing function, so by definition it had to be pre-authenticated because it was part of the authentication process. So it led to OS command injection. So now you've got this web app that's hosted in a company's DMZ that our client didn't make, they just bought, put it there to fulfill a purpose, and it's got OS command injection, and you didn't need any auth to do that. And then because of where it was, it actually allowed us to use that host and pivot into the internal network because the bit that they could control, the inner firewall of the DMZ, they also hadn't been very strict about that, right? That host in the DMZ was able to go further into the network across lots of protocols. So completely fixed. CA did the right thing, fixed the bug, but just a very simple concept of finding, again, simple bugs in commercial software and what it would able to lead to on a pen test. So, you know, by extension, perhaps somebody else could find this and use it for malicious means. Last example of one that was for internal software. We were working on a pen test, so Noah Bedome, Justin O'May, Ben Lincoln again, out of the Seattle office, working on an internal pen test, and they found an Nexpose appliance on the internal network that had the default credentials to get into the web app to control Nexpose, right? That's a configuration problem that company should have sorted out. But it allowed us to go from unauthenticated to like post-auth content, of course, and then try to find vulns in that. And at the time, Nexpose was using a Java key store passphrase that was hard-coded and common across all instances of Nexpose that exist. So it was this idea of like they were using common codes. What it ultimately allowed us to do was to break into an area of Nexpose where it contains the credentials that you've set up for your authenticated scanning, which included Not like, you know, happens in most companies. It included domain admin credentials because this company had to give the scanner domain admin. Let's not get into that whole thing, right? But they had given this scanner domain admin. And because of this, like, you know, pretty simple flaw in Nexpose, it broke the test wide open for us, right? So a combination of like poor config, actual vulnerability in Rapid7's product, and then the fact that the company had really powerful credentials stored in it led to, you know, widespread ownage of the company during the pen test. Completely fixed. They did everything perfectly. It's all been taken care of. But another example of just a COTS product that was bought and that in itself had some flaws that hadn't come out until this point. So those were the examples, right? And there are lots more. And anyone who works in pen testing here will have their own versions of these stories, right? I'm not saying that we're unique and that we're able to find these bugs. They're easy bugs. Everyone can find the bugs. So what's it like working with the third parties, ultimately? Well, it absolutely varies, right? So when bugs are found, then what? So we find OWASP like all the time, either through research or on pen tests, just like lots of companies. We're really passionate about responsible disclosure. We won't talk about bugs or show details of bugs until they're absolutely fixed and that we've gone through a period of time where we're pretty happy that most people would have had a chance to apply the patch, right? That's the other factor in responsible disclosure. It's not just, well, they produced a patch, so we released the bug on the same day as the patch. That's not how the world works, right? You need to allow a period of time for the customer base to actually patch things. But it's sometimes easier said than done to work with software vendors. Has anyone ever tried to report a vulnerability to a software vendor before? Does anyone have? Some people will. It varies, right? Sometimes you will have like this full, brilliant support structure where they reach out to you and put you through a process and track it, and like it gets resolved in a matter of days and what have you, and you're like, oh, holy crap, they've produced the patch already. This is amazing. And other times you're like, now, where is the email address on their website? Like, where's the security at? Like, who do I talk to? Who do I call? And it becomes really, really hard, and you get caught in a sales loop with them. They're like, so you want to buy the product? No, I don't want to buy the product. I want to report a bug in the product. And you know, it really can become this kind of arduous thing. So when you buy software for your organization, that's one of the questions that you should have, right? Am I going to have a good relationship with the vendor of this software? Are they going to fix bugs for me? Are they going to be, do they know what bugs are? Do they know what vulnerabilities are? That kind of thing. I think that all of this is an easier conversation before you've bought the software, by the way. And that's going to be like a theme that comes through from this. So what do I think you can do, right? I've obviously just given you some examples that I think there's a problem that for the software you buy, the support and the security support especially for it is going to be incredibly varied. I've given you some examples of like just simple bugs that we found, you know, just, oh, shake this, bug falls out, use it in a meaningful way. But what can you do? And that's kind of like how I want to round out, you know. Proactive security during software procurement. In my experience, most of the customers that I work with, most of the people I work with, this is a tough thing. It's not happened yet, or it's not happening in the way that it should. So let's do something. So I want to just do some trivia, right? And this is one of those things where it's always way funnier when you write the slides. So there we go. I knew that would work. So let's do a little bit of trivia at Kev's English Pub. All right. Ready? When you are buying software, do you ask about security? A, yes. B, no. C, haha, you're so funny, you think security people are allowed to get involved in this process. This is managed by a non-technical person under the instructions of senior executives that has read an industry advisory report. Or D, leave now, you're making me feel sick. Now, some people will be like, it's A, at my company it's A, and it's like, brilliant, like absolutely fantastic to hear. Most people, it's going to be like one of these, right? That security is not consulted when software is bought. I'm going to suggest that's a problem. At the very least, security, either the team, the people that are responsible for security, or the word security should be involved in this process, right? So do the product features include privileged or risky operations? So let's threat model the product, right? Is this some product we don't care about, or is this some product that's actually, because if we don't care about it, and it doesn't do anything risky, then maybe skip all of this, right? I'm not saying put everything through this kind of scrutiny, because it's not necessarily going to be fit for purpose. But if when you look at a product and you go, this is like identity management, or this is like thing that controls, thing that makes me money, then, okay, yeah, risky operations. Is there a history of security vulnerabilities with the product? Let's just start there, right? It's 2017, like maybe the product's had a few bugs. Let's research that, find out what they were. Oh my goodness, they had 7 command injections over the course of 3 years. You know, that could tell you something. Has the company itself been involved in a breach? That's quite easy to find out these days, right? Just go to any of the big data mining sites that talk about breaches and just figure out if the company's in there. They probably won't be, but it's worth checking. Is there actually anything mentioned about security on their website at all? Look again, I'll wait. You know, it may be buried, but like, you know, it may be there. So you kind of, is there anything beyond marketing fluff? Is there anything that suggests to you they have a security team or they have an SDLC? Are they blogging about what they do in security? You know, good indicator that they're pretty mature. Will they let you talk to anyone technical about security? You know, like, we've all bought software, probably, and like, you're like trying to buy this new thing, and you're like, hey, just to let you know, like, I'm kind of working security, be interested to talk to the engineers about what they've done for security. And then sales engineers like, oh, we got you covered. Let me just send you some PDFs. And you're like, nice grasp, bro. You know, like, it's nothing. There's not, you're not getting a real conversation with a technical person. So if they're actually like, yeah, no, we've got a security engineer that can talk to you about the history of the product and what we do for input validation, then you'd be like, all right, this company gets it. Do they have a published mechanism for vulnerability reporting? Do they have a bug bounty? You know, like, these are all things that might suggest maturity of thinking on their part. Do they mention SLAs in response? Have they produced any kind of independent report and attestation, that kind of thing that they can show you, right? This is now hugely part of the sales cycle, by the way. Software companies know that you may ask them to see their reports. So if they don't have that, that is possibly indicative of, you know, maybe they're not there yet, you know? But I think aim higher than that, right? So if you've got a company that has a security, if you work for a company that has a security team, or you work with security vendors like me, then let's put the product under scrutiny, right? Can we get a trial of the product? Ask the company, we want a trial of the product to bake it off, but also to test it for security. Find out what they say about that. Let them know that we're going to try and find vulnerabilities in this product. Are you going to fix it? Are they okay with you asking if you can have your testing partner look at it? That kind of thing. We're not asking them to pay for the bill or anything, unless you've got like serious procurement power. But we're just asking them, like, conceptually, like, what do you think about this? Will they pay for the effort, though? It's always worth a shot, isn't it? You know, if you're like a really big company and you're about to like drop them serious like money on a software product, you might be able to suggest to them that they should pay for the security testing that they haven't yet had done. It's worth a go. Will they make a commitment to fix any vulnerabilities? Are they going to charge you for that? I've had situations where my clients have said, you know, all those bugs you found in the web console, take a look at this email, you'll love it. And it's the developers going, here's what that will cost for us to fix. You didn't say you wanted a secure one. You know, that's the subtext there. So, like, how are they at kind of handling this concept? Ultimately, I think that if you're buying a piece of software that's going to perform a critical function in your company, you should be having this kind of conversation, and it should include these types of features. This is my version of this list. You guys are all going to get these slides. You will have other things that you probably want to add to this yourself. But conceptually, like, if this is not a conversation that's happening, I'm suggesting it absolutely should happen. So let's close out, and I think we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So, right, what was this all about? Well, you buy lots of software, you put it in your company. In most cases, that's going to be totally fine. But in other cases, it's possibly going to be full of bugs that somebody could use, you know, against you. You don't own that software, so you can't fix it yourself. So you're largely at the mercy of the company that you bought it from. How are they going to handle these ideas of fixing bugs? You should go through that kind of conversation with them before you've bought it, if you can. Right? If you're not currently as security people involved in the procurement process of COTS software, then get yourself in there, elbow your way in, whatever you can do. Ultimately, try to make sure that security is part of that procurement conversation. I work with so many companies that have got these awful, awful turkeys on their network that they were forced into buying by a group of people that were in charge of, sourcing a product that fulfilled a function, and then we get hold of it at some point and go, wow, and then they're in this huge cycle of trying to work with the vendor, and the vendor's not into it. Remember, this is ultimately about due diligence, right? This is a risk management thing. If you're putting software in your network, it's up to you as the company, I think, to try to figure out what the exposure is through that software. So, hopefully that's been interesting to you guys. If anyone wants to get in contact with me and talk about any of this, please do. I think we have about 5 minutes or so, so if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Okay, now I have a microphone for you.
Quick question.
Yes. Is that working?
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah? Okay, good.
A lot of the barrier to performing a lot of these tests at most companies is that you tend to buy a lot of software versus what you have the ability to test.
Yes.
I know you probably have some point of view. I'm curious on how you would recommend companies approach balancing the load of testing everything or some of the things. Absolutely
not everything. So I think this is just a vulnerability management program question in general, right? How do you prioritize the effort? Because you don't have an unlimited budget, you don't have unlimited people, but you have lots and lots of stuff. So for me, this always comes down to value of data and the criticality of the function that the software is performing. So when I work with companies to try to figure out how they're going to prioritize what they do, those are the types of things that I'm trying to bring out. Tell me about why this piece of software should be tested. What's the risk involved in a compromise here? So I think, as much as that's going to be a long process for a lot of companies, that there's an element of threat modeling to come up with that prioritization of what you should look at. I feel like I've really disappointed you with that answer, but I think that's the reality of the answer, I'm afraid.
Well, yeah, risk management. You prioritize the things that are the worst. I'm just curious if you had any ideas on, do you recommend most companies have a significant team to test the most worst stuff, or to hire third parties?
I absolutely recommend third parties. No. Again, so when you work with companies over a number of years, you get to watch them kind of go from a firm that had no internal team and had to outsource everything to a firm that suddenly gets an appetite for and a budget for creating an internal team. So I think that the most successful security programs are a combination of those two things. And you use third parties for the stuff you have to use third parties for, or because there's a skills gap or a capacity gap. But yeah, I've got no problem with you creating and using an internal team to do all of this testing if they've got the right skills and they can do the work. Get on with it. Yeah, I think it comes down to when you hire a third party, they are hopefully experts in security, but they're not experts in your business, right? So you tend to run into a lot of problems with remediation. Third party comes in, does the gig, gives you a vulnerability report. There's not enough context in it. Maybe they haven't worked very hard with you to figure out business risks. So and that leads to pain then, right? And then when executives are kind of why is it so painful to fix this stuff? I think that's a good time to talk about how you can create a capability that is both technically able to find vulnerabilities, but is also indoctrinated in local knowledge of working at the company such that they can help with business risk. I'm not saying that's the best or the only way to do it, but it's a way I've managed to gain traction in the past. Are you fed up with your external consultants not knowing enough about your business? If you are, maybe consider bringing security into an internal function. Any other questions? Okay. Well, you guys have been fantastic. I hope you have a really good conference. Thank you very much.